Among the countless worlds of the Imperium, few environments forge warriors as resilient as the death world of Nocturne. Located in the Segmentum Ultima, Nocturne stands as a testament to nature's unforgiving might. A volcanic wasteland of black sand deserts, sulfurous lakes, and mountain ranges that perpetually belch smoke and fire into the planet's thin atmosphere. The skies remain perpetually dark, choked with ash and cinder, while the ground below trembles with constant seismic activity. Temperatures on the surface regularly reach levels that would cook an unprotected human alive, making survival on this harsh world not merely difficult, but seemingly impossible. Yet life persists on Nocturne. The indigenous human population, the Nocturnians, have adapted to this brutal environment over countless generations. Their physical characteristics reflect this adaptation. Coal-black skin that provides protection against the intense heat and radiation, glowing red eyes that can see through the perpetual gloom, and a physical robustness that allows them to endure conditions that would kill most baseline humans. These characteristics would become hallmarks of the Salamanders chapter, whose gene seed further amplifies these traits to superhuman levels. The Nocturnian people live in 7 principal settlements known as the Sanctuary Cities, each built into the sides of mountains or within massive cavern systems to provide protection from the volatile surface conditions. These cities, Hesiod, Themis, Heliosa, Ethonian, Clymene, Epimethus, and Prometheus, serve as the cultural and economic centers of Nocturnian society. Each city maintains its own distinct traditions and customs, though all share common values of self-reliance, craftsmanship, and community protection. Nocturnian culture is fundamentally tribal, organized around extended family units and clan structures. Leadership is typically earned through demonstrations of wisdom, strength, and skill, rather than inherited through bloodlines. The harsh environment necessitates a communal approach to survival. Lone individuals rarely last long against Nocturne's dangers. This emphasis on community welfare and protection of the vulnerable would later become central tenets of Salamander's chapter philosophy, distinguishing them from many of their more detached Astartes brethren. Craftsmanship stands as the most revered skill among the Nocturnian people. The planet's crust contains abundant deposits of rare and valuable metals and minerals, forged in the intense heat of Nocturne's core and brought to the surface through constant volcanic activity. Nocturnian smiths are renowned throughout the sector for their mastery of metalworking, creating weapons, tools, and artifacts of exceptional quality. Young men prove their worth by embarking on dangerous expeditions to harvest these materials from active volcanic regions, braving lava flows, toxic gases, and predatory fauna to bring back precious resources. This tradition of craftsmanship extends beyond mere utility. It is viewed as a spiritual practice, a form of meditation and devotion. Nocturnian smiths believe that part of their spirit enters their creations, making each item unique and imbued with the maker's essence. This philosophy would later manifest in the Salamanders' approach to wargear, with each battle brother maintaining and often crafting their own equipment, resulting in some of the finest maintained weapons and armor in the Adeptus Astartes. The relationship between Nocturne and its oversized moon, Prometheus, defines the rhythm of life on the Death World. Prometheus follows an erratic orbit, completing a full circuit around Nocturne every 7 Terran years. As the moon approaches its closest point to the planet, a period known as the time of trial, its gravitational pull triggers catastrophic geological events across Nocturne's surface. Volcanoes erupt with unprecedented fury, tectonic plates shift violently, and massive tsunamis sweep across the few oceans that dot the planet's surface. During these periods, which last approximately 15 Terran months, the Nocturnian people retreat to the deepest chambers of their mountain fortresses or to specially constructed underground shelters. Even these sanctuaries provide limited protection, with many collapsing under the strain of the seismic activity. Those who survive emerge to find a transformed landscape. Settlements destroyed, geographical features altered beyond recognition, and new deposits of precious materials thrust to the surface from the planet's depths. The time of trial serves as both destruction and renewal, wiping away the old and presenting new opportunities for those resilient enough to endure. After each cycle, the Nocturnians rebuild their settlements, often in new locations better suited to the altered terrain. They harvest the newly exposed mineral wealth and begin the process of recovery, knowing that in 7 years, they will face the trial once more. This endless cycle of destruction and rebirth has instilled in the Nocturnian people a stoic acceptance of hardship and an unwavering determination to persist against all odds. It was into this unforgiving environment that the infant Primarch Vulkan arrived, his gestation pod crashing into the slopes of Mount Deathfire, the largest volcano on Nocturne's surface. The exact date of his arrival remains uncertain in imperial records, though it is known to have occurred during the latter stages of the Age of Strife, when humanity's interstellar civilization lay in ruins and Terra was still decades away from unification under the Emperor. Unlike many of his brother Primarchs who landed on worlds where they could quickly rise to positions of power, Vulkan was discovered by a humble blacksmith named Enbel from the settlement of Hesiod. Enbel raised the rapidly growing child as his own son, teaching him the arts of smithing and the values of Nocturnian society. By the age of 3 Terran years, Vulkan had already reached the size and strength of an adult man and displayed a preternatural talent for metalworking, creating weapons and tools of remarkable quality that surpassed even the most skilled adult craftsmen. Vulkan's first true test came during his youth, when a dark Eldar raiding party descended upon Hesiod during one of their cruel slave-taking expeditions. While other settlements had been devastated by similar raids, Vulkan rallied the people of Hesiod, organizing them into an effective defensive force. Armed with weapons he had personally crafted, Vulkan led the counterattack against the Xenos raiders, his tactical acumen and physical might turning what would have been a massacre into a decisive victory for the Nocturnians. This marked the first time in living memory that a dark Eldar raid had been successfully repelled, earning Vulkan the title of Deliverer among the people of Hesiod. Word of this remarkable young leader spread across Nocturne, and Vulkan's reputation grew as he traveled between settlements, teaching defensive tactics and improved metalworking techniques. He established a network of warning beacons across the volcanic plains, allowing settlements to alert one another of dangers and coordinate their responses. Under his guidance, the Nocturnian people began to unite as never before, moving beyond their traditional tribal divisions toward a more cohesive society. The defining moment in Vulkan's early life came during a time of trial, when the Emperor of Mankind arrived on Nocturne. The Master of Mankind had been traveling the galaxy in search of his scattered Primarch sons, guided by his psychic powers and complex prognostications. The Emperor concealed his true identity, presenting himself as an unusually skilled smith and warrior from off-world who wished to participate in the traditional contest held at the end of each time of trial. This contest, known as the Challenge of the Flame, tested participants in feats of strength, endurance, and craftsmanship. Competitors were required to hunt the massive salamander lizards that emerged from their underground lairs during the seismic activity, then forge a weapon from materials gathered during the hunt, and finally use that weapon in ritual combat against other challengers. The winner would be declared the regent of Prometheus until the next time of trial. Vulkan and the disguised Emperor emerged as the final 2 competitors after days of grueling challenges. Both had slain the largest salamanders seen in generations and crafted weapons of extraordinary quality. Their final contest required them to stand upon the slopes of Mount Deathfire, holding their ceremonial hammers while lava flowed around them, testing their endurance to the absolute limit. After several days, Vulkan's footing slipped, and he began to fall toward the molten lava below. The Emperor, displaying his true nature, leaped forward to save his son, catching him before he could fall into the deadly flow. This act of self-sacrifice, risking his own victory to save another, impressed Vulkan deeply as it embodied the highest values of Nocturnian society. When the Emperor revealed his true identity and purpose, Vulkan immediately knelt and pledged his loyalty, recognizing in his father the same commitment to humanity's protection that he himself held. The meeting between Vulkan and the Emperor transformed Nocturnian society. The Emperor shared advanced technological knowledge with the population, improving their living conditions and defensive capabilities. More importantly, He selected the strongest and most resilient of Nocturne's youth to form the core of the 18th Legion, which would become the Salamanders under Vulkan's leadership. Before departing with his father to take command of his legion, Vulkan established the Promethean Cult, a philosophical and spiritual tradition that codified the values he believed should guide his warriors: self-sacrifice, resilience, craftsmanship, and above all, the protection of human life. He appointed regents to govern in his absence and established training facilities on Prometheus, Nocturne's moon, where future aspirants would be tested and transformed into Astartes. The cultural impact of Vulkan's meeting with the Emperor resonates throughout Nocturnian society to the present day. The challenge of the flame continues as a tradition, with the winner honored as a representative of Vulkan himself. The forges of Nocturne produce some of the finest weapons and armor in the Imperium, many crafted using techniques personally taught by the Primarch. Most significantly, the people of Nocturne maintain a unique relationship with the Salamanders chapter, providing not only recruits but also cultural and spiritual guidance, keeping the Astartes connected to their humanity in ways few other chapters maintain. The harsh crucible of Nocturne, with its cycles of destruction and renewal, its emphasis on community survival over individual glory, and its traditions of craftsmanship and self-improvement, created in Vulkan a Primarch unlike any other. These same forces continue to shape the Salamanders, making them among the most distinctly human of the Emperor's transhuman warriors, forged in fire yet dedicated to the preservation of life above all else. When Vulkan departed Nocturne to assume command of his legion, he left behind a world transformed by his presence, but carried with him the unbreakable spirit of his homeworld. The journey to reunite with the 18th Legion marked the beginning of a profound transformation that would reshape not just a military force, but forge a brotherhood unlike any other among the Legion's Astartes. The 18th Legion had operated without their Primarch for several decades during the early Great Crusade. Originally designated as the Dragon Warriors by some Imperial chroniclers, these early Astartes suffered significant losses in several compliance actions, where they were deployed as shock troops with little regard for casualties. Imperial records indicate that the Legion was frequently assigned to hostile compliance actions against human worlds that refused Imperial rule, earning them a reputation for brutality that stood at odds with their future identity. Vulkan's first meeting with his Gene sons occurred aboard the Legion flagship Flamerot in the late 800s of the 30th millennium. The assembled warriors who greeted their Primarch bore little resemblance to the Salamanders they would become. Their armor was a deep, burnished bronze rather than the emerald green they would later adopt, and their tactical doctrines emphasized overwhelming force rather than strategic resilience. Most significantly, they lacked the sense of brotherhood and humanitarian purpose that would become their defining characteristics. The transformation began immediately. Vulkan, unlike several of his brother Primarchs, who immediately led their legions into battle upon assuming command, instead ordered a period of reflection and reorganization. For 3 Terran months, the 18th Legion remained in orbit around the death world of Antim, where Vulkan personally interviewed every company commander and many of the rank and file battle brothers, assessing their character as much as their combat abilities. What he discovered troubled him deeply. While his sons were capable warriors, they had developed a detachment from the human populations they were ostensibly fighting to protect. Years of deployment as expendable shock troops had fostered a fatalistic mindset where victory was measured solely in enemy casualties rather than civilian lives saved. This stood in stark contrast to the communal values of Nocturne, where every life held value and the strong existed to protect the weak. Vulkan's first decree was to reorganize the Legion's command structure, elevating officers who demonstrated concern for their battle brothers and tactical acumen over those who had risen through ranks purely through tallies of kills. His second action proved more controversial among some of his warriors. He established regular rotations, where companies would return to Nocturne to live among the people, learning the crafts and values of his homeworld. A warrior who forgets what he fights for becomes nothing more than a weapon, Vulkan told his captains during this reorganization, and weapons do not distinguish between friend and foe. the most dramatic change came in the form of the Promethean philosophy. Drawing from Nocturnian traditions, but adapted for the transhuman warriors of his legion, this philosophical framework emphasized three core principles: self-reliance through mastery of craft, self-sacrifice in service to humanity, and unwavering resilience in the face of adversity. Unlike the more ritualistic traditions that developed in other legions, the Promethean philosophy functioned more as a practical ethical code than a formalized cult. Central to this philosophy was the concept of the Promethean journey, the idea that each salamander must continuously strive for self-improvement through both martial prowess and craftsmanship. Vulkan established forged temples throughout the Legion's fleet where battle brothers were expected to maintain and improve their own wargear. Those who displayed particular aptitude were apprenticed to the Legion's tech marines, learning advanced metallurgical techniques that blended Mars-approved methods with traditional Nocturnian craftsmanship. This emphasis on craftsmanship quickly became the Legion's most distinctive feature. Within a decade of Vulkan taking command, the 18th Legion had developed a reputation for fielding some of the finest weapons and armor in the Imperium. Each company maintained its own forge facilities, and battle brothers were judged as much by the quality of their craftsmanship as by their battlefield accomplishments. The tradition of artificer armor, customized, master-crafted power armor superior to standard issue equipment, became particularly associated with the Salamanders during this period. The Legion's martial doctrine underwent equally significant changes. Where previously they had relied on overwhelming force and attrition warfare, Vulkan introduced more sophisticated tactical approaches that emphasized resilience and strategic flexibility. The Salamanders developed expertise in zone mortalis combat, warfare in confined environments like starship corridors, underground complexes, and urban settings where their superior durability and close combat prowess gave them distinct advantages. Most notably, the Legion developed their signature expertise in flamecraft and thermal weaponry, drawing on Nocturnian traditions of fire as both destructive and purifying force. Vulkan personally designed improved variants of standard flamer weapons. The Infernus pattern, heavy flamer, became synonymous with the Salamanders, capable of projecting promethium flames hot enough to melt ceramite armor. These weapons proved particularly effective against Xenos species like orcs and the insectoid megarachnids that were encountered during the Great Crusade. Vulkan's emphasis on protecting civilian populations also led to specialized tactical doctrines. The Salamanders became experts in evacuation operations, defensive perimeters, and combat engineering that minimized collateral damage. During compliance actions, they typically deployed additional resources to establish refugee centers and medical facilities for non-combatants, practices that were often viewed as inefficient by more pragmatic legions like the Iron Warriors or Death Guard. By the mid-stages of the Great Crusade, the 18th Legion had fully transformed into the Salamanders, both in appearance and doctrine. Their armor was repainted in the distinctive emerald green that symbolized Vulkan's connection to Nocturne's forests during its rare periods of renewal, with black trim representing the volcanic soil of their homeworld. Their heraldry incorporated the imagery of the great fire lizards of Nocturne, and many battle brothers adorned their armor with drake scales collected during ritual hunts on their homeworld. The physical appearance of the Astartes themselves changed over generations of recruitment from Nocturne. Their skin developed the characteristic obsidian black pigmentation of Nocturnians, while their eyes took on a red luminescence that allowed them to see clearly in low-light conditions. These traits, amplified by the gene seed's interaction with Nocturne's unique environmental conditions, gave the Salamanders a distinctive appearance that sometimes unnerved even their fellow Astartes. The Salamanders participated in numerous significant campaigns during the Great Crusade, though they were never among the largest legions in terms of numbers. Imperial records indicate that at their peak strength before the Horus Heresy, they numbered approximately 89,000 Astartes, smaller than giants like the Ultramarines or Word-Bearers, but still a formidable force. Their relatively limited numbers were offset by superior equipment, with nearly every battle brother wearing some form of artificer armor and wielding master-crafted weapons. One of their most notable early campaigns under Vulkan's leadership was the Compliance of Antime, the Death World where Vulkan had initially reorganized the Legion. The planet's human population had regressed to a feral state, living in underground cavern networks to escape the predatory megafauna that dominated the surface. Rather than the typical compliance approach of overwhelming force followed by imperial administration, Vulkan instituted a gradual integration program. Salamander squads lived among the population, teaching them advanced survival techniques and technology while gradually introducing imperial concepts. Within 3 years, the population had willingly accepted compliance without a single casualty. The Salamanders' relationship with other legions varied considerably based on doctrinal compatibility. They maintained particularly close ties with the Iron Hands, whose emphasis on technological mastery aligned with their own focus on craftsmanship, despite significant philosophical differences regarding the value of human life. The Imperial Fists also shared a natural kinship with the Salamanders, both legions valuing resilience and defensive warfare, though Dorn's sons lacked the humanitarian focus that defined Vulkan's warriors. More complicated was the Salamanders' relationship with the Night Lords and World Eaters. Vulkan openly criticized Conrad Kerr's use of terror tactics against civilian populations, considering such methods not only dishonorable but counterproductive to the Great Crusade's ultimate goals. Similarly, the Salamanders frequently found themselves at odds with Angron's World Eaters, whose berserker tactics often resulted in unacceptable civilian casualties by Salamander standards. The 133rd Expeditionary Fleet, commanded by Vulkan himself, became known for its thoroughness rather than its speed of conquest. Where some Primarchs measured success by the number of worlds brought to compliance, Vulkan prioritized the stability and prosperity of compliant worlds. This sometimes led to friction with the administrative branches of the Imperium, who viewed the Salamanders' approach as inefficient. However, statistical analyses conducted by the Divisio Administratum eventually confirmed that worlds brought to compliance by the Salamanders had significantly lower rates of rebellion and required fewer garrison forces than the Imperial average. Among the most significant campaigns of this period was the Karatan Compliance in the late 900s of the 30th millennium. This joint operation with the Night Lord's Legion demonstrated the stark contrast in approaches between the two forces. When the population of a major urban center resisted imperial rule, Kerr's warriors enacted brutal reprisals against civilian targets. Vulkan's Salamanders instead established protected zones where non-combatants could seek refuge, directly contradicting the Night Lord's strategy of terror. The resulting tension between the Primarchs nearly escalated to open conflict, with Vulkan reportedly coming close to striking Kerr's before withdrawing his forces from the campaign entirely. The Salamanders also distinguished themselves during the Nov Shendak campaign, where they fought alongside the First Legion and the Emperor himself against the intelligent arachnid Xenos that had enslaved the human population. When the Dark Angels advocated for orbital bombardment of infested population centers, Vulkan instead led his Firedrake's Terminator elite in surgical strikes against the Xenos Node Queens, preserving thousands of human lives at the cost of higher Astartes casualties. The Emperor reportedly commended Vulkan's approach, citing it as exemplary of the Great Crusade's true purpose. Perhaps the most formative campaign for cementing the Salamander's identity came during the liberation of the Bastion worlds in 928 of the 30th millennium. These human-inhabited planets had been subjected to systematic raids by Dark Eldar corsairs for generations, with entire populations harvested for the Xenos' terrible purposes. The Salamanders' response was methodical and thorough. They established predictive defense grids across the sector, trained planetary defense forces, and laid intricate traps for the raiders. When the Dark Eldar eventually attacked in force, they encountered not helpless prey, but prepared defenders supported by the full might of the 18th Legion. The Dropsite Massacre on Istvan V stands as one of the most devastating betrayals in Imperial history, a moment when the galaxy's fate pivoted on treachery so profound, it would forever alter the Salamander's Legion. As the 31st millennium progressed and the first tremors of Horus's rebellion shook the Imperium, few suspected the depth of corruption that had taken root among the legions of Astartes. When word reached Terra that Horus had turned against the Emperor, the response was swift but ultimately played directly into the War Master's hands. 4 legions were dispatched to crush the rebellion at Istvan III. The Death Guard, Emperor's Children, World Eaters, and Sons of Horus, where loyal elements within these already corrupted legions were purged in atomic fire. As reports of this atrocity reached the Imperium, 7 legions were assembled to deliver the Emperor's retribution. The Iron Hands, Raven Guard, and Salamanders would form the first wave, while the Night Lords, Alpha Legion, Iron Warriors, and Word Bearers would arrive as the second wave. The Salamanders arrived at the Istvan system in force, their emerald armored warriors prepared for what they believed would be a straightforward, if difficult, campaign against their traitorous brothers. Vulkan had mobilized nearly 89,000 Astartes, the vast majority of his legion, leaving only skeleton forces at Nocturne and other outposts. The Primarch's decision to commit so completely reflected his character. He would not hold back when the Imperium faced its greatest threat. The initial assault on Istvan V began with a massive orbital bombardment of Horus's positions. The traitor forces had established themselves in the Urgal Depression, a vast volcanic plain surrounded by jagged mountains, terrain eerily reminiscent of Nocturne itself. This similarity was not lost on the Salamanders, many of whom took it as an auspicious sign that they would be fighting on ground that favored their combat doctrines. Vulkan coordinated closely with Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands and Corax of the Raven Guard, developing a 3-pronged assault strategy. The Salamanders would secure the southern approach, using their expertise in thermal weaponry to flush out entrenched enemy positions. Meanwhile, the Iron Hands would launch a direct frontal assault on the traitor's center, while the Raven Guard executed rapid strikes against enemy flanks. In theory, this balanced approach played to each legion's strengths. The reality proved far more brutal. As the first wave made planetfall, they encountered resistance that exceeded all projections. The traitor forces fought with unexpected coordination and ferocity, employing weapons and tactics that shocked even veteran Astartes. Most disturbing were reports from the front lines of legionaries employing warp-tainted abilities that defied explanation. Emperor's Children warriors moving with impossible speed, Death Guard shrugging off mortal wounds, and Sons of Horus displaying prescient knowledge of loyalist movements. Despite these challenges, the initial assault progressed according to plan. The Salamanders' pyroclasts, specialists in thermal weaponry, proved particularly effective against World Eaters' berserkers, their concentrated flame attacks burning through even the most frenzied charges. Tactical squads established fire corridors that allowed the Legion to advance methodically across the volcanic plains, while Firedrake Terminators spearheaded assaults against hardened bunker networks. Vulkan himself led from the front, as was his custom. Wielding the legendary Thunder Hammer Dawnbringer and the master-crafted spear Furnace's Heart, the Primarch became a rallying point for his sons. Where Vulkan fought, the traitor lines buckled and broke. During one particularly fierce engagement, he personally destroyed a traitor Warhound Titan that had pinned down 3 Salamander companies, climbing its leg armor before smashing through its reactor housing with Dawnbringer, leaping clear as the war machine collapsed in nuclear fire. After approximately 6 hours of brutal fighting, the Loyalist forces had established a tenuous foothold in the Depression. Casualties were severe. The Iron Hands had lost nearly a third of their deployed strength, while the Raven Guard and Salamanders had each suffered approximately 25% casualties. Ferrus Manus, his characteristic impatience showing, urged an immediate push toward Horus's command center despite these losses. Corax counseled caution, suggesting they consolidate their position and wait for the second wave. Vulkan, ever the mediator, proposed a measured advance supported by their remaining armor assets. Before a consensus could be reached, word came that the second wave had arrived in orbit. Relief swept through the Loyalist lines. With fresh troops, victory seemed assured. As the second wave made planetfall behind Loyalist lines, Vulkan ordered his Salamanders to prepare for a coordinated advance. The Legion's Tech Marines worked feverishly to repair damaged vehicles, while apothecaries tended to the wounded, extracting gene seed from the fallen, and treating those who could return to battle. The exact moment when the trap was sprung remains difficult to pinpoint in the chaos that followed. Some accounts suggest it began when Iron Warriors' artillery positions, ostensibly established to provide supporting fire, suddenly redirected their bombardments onto Loyalist formations. Others claim the first betrayal came when word-bearers drop pods landed directly among Raven Guard reserve companies and disgorged not reinforcements but executioners. What is certain is that within minutes, the entire battlefield transformed into a slaughterhouse. The 4 legions of the second wave revealed their true allegiance to Horus, catching the Loyalists in a devastating crossfire. Simultaneously, the original traitor forces launched a massive counterattack, trapping the Salamanders, Iron Hands, and Raven Guard in a lethal vice. Vox networks were flooded with contradictory orders and false information, further disorienting the Loyalist forces. For the Salamanders, the betrayal struck at the very core of their identity. A legion built on brotherhood and trust now faced betrayal on an unimaginable scale. Tactical cohesion disintegrated as companies found themselves cut off and surrounded. The Legion's methodical approach to warfare, so effective in planned operations, proved ill-suited to the sudden chaos of betrayal. Nevertheless, the Salamanders' inherent resilience came to the fore. Isolated squads formed defensive perimeters, protecting wounded battle brothers as they attempted to fight their way back to their Primarch. Vulkan recognized immediately that the battle was lost. His priority shifted from victory to salvation. As many of his sons as possible must escape to continue the fight against Horus. He ordered all Salamanders to converge on his position, intending to create a breakout corridor toward their landing zones. This order, broadcast on emergency channels, reached approximately 60% of the Legion's surviving forces. The remainder, cut off from command or unable to disengage, continued fighting isolated actions across the depression. The retreat rapidly devolved into a desperate fighting withdrawal. Salamander tactical squads formed overlapping fields of fire, while fire drakes held the most vulnerable sections of their contracting perimeter. The Legion's remaining dreadnoughts sacrificed themselves in rearguard actions, buying precious minutes for their brothers to fall back. Ancient Raven, a contemptor dreadnought who had once been Vulkan's equerry, held a critical chokepoint alone against an entire company of word-bearers, his frame eventually disappearing beneath a tide of crimson-armored traitors. As the noose tightened, Vulkan made a fateful decision. Gathering his remaining fire drakes and pyroclasts, he prepared to launch a diversionary attack against the traitor command position. This attack would draw enemy forces away from the extraction zones, giving the bulk of his surviving sons a chance to reach their gunships. Captain Artificers Numian, commander of the Pyre Guard, Vulkan's personal bodyguard, protested this decision, insisting his place was at his Primarch's side. Vulkan reportedly placed his hand on Numian's shoulder and entrusted him with leading the remaining Salamanders back to Nocturne to ensure the Legion would endure regardless of his fate. Vulkan's final charge has become legendary even among the mythic events of the Horus Heresy. With approximately 200 of his finest warriors, the Primarch broke through the traitor cordon and drove directly toward Horus's position. Eyewitness accounts describe Vulkan as a figure of vengeance incarnate, his armor blackened by soot and damaged beyond recognition, wielding Dawnbringer in devastating arcs that cleared entire squads of traitor Astartes. The diversionary attack succeeded in its primary objective. Enemy forces pivoted to intercept this new threat, creating openings that allowed thousands of Salamanders to reach their extraction craft. However, the cost was catastrophic. One by one, the warriors accompanying Vulkan fell to concentrated enemy fire. By the time the Primarch reached the outer perimeter of Horus's command center, fewer than 20 Salamanders remained at his side. What happened next is clouded by conflicting accounts. Imperial records indicate that Vulkan confronted several of his traitor brothers, including Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children and Perturabo of the Iron Warriors. The exact details of this confrontation remain unclear, but all accounts agree on the outcome. Vulkan was overwhelmed by the combined might of his corrupted brothers and their elite warriors. Witnesses reported seeing the Primarch fall beneath a concentrated barrage of fire, so intense it reduced the ground beneath him to glass. With their Primarch fallen and over 2/3 of their legion dead or missing, the surviving Salamanders fought desperately to escape the killing ground. Captain Numian organized a final extraction effort, gathering scattered survivors and leading them to the few remaining Thunderhawks and Stormbirds still capable of flight. The Iron Hands, having lost Ferrus Manus to Fulgrim's blade, were in even worse condition, their chain of command shattered. The Raven Guard, thanks to Corax's leadership and their specialized infiltration training, fared marginally better, with several thousand warriors managing to break through the traitor lines. As the last Loyalist vessels lifted from the surface of Istvan V, the full extent of the catastrophe became clear. Of the nearly 89,000 Salamanders who had made planetfall, fewer than 3,000 escaped the massacre. The Iron Hands and Raven Guard suffered similarly devastating losses. 3 legions, once numbering approximately 300,000 Astartes combined, had been reduced to scattered remnants in a single day of betrayal and slaughter. The psychological impact on the surviving Salamanders was profound. A legion defined by brotherhood had witnessed the ultimate betrayal. Warriors who had valued trust and community above all now found themselves in a galaxy where such values seemed naive. Most devastating was the apparent loss of their Primarch, the living embodiment of their ideals and the spiritual father of their legion. What the survivors did not know, what would not be revealed until much later, was that Vulkan had not truly perished on Istvan V. The Primarch's unique nature as a perpetual, an immortal being capable of regenerating from any wound, even apparent death, meant that he had survived the seemingly fatal assault. However, this survival would lead not to immediate salvation, but to further torment, as he was captured by the Night Lord's Primarch Conrad Kurz and subjected to repeated torture and execution in a macabre game that tested even Vulkan's immortal resilience. The aftermath of the drop site massacre left the Salamanders' legion shattered almost beyond recognition. The survivors who managed to escape Istvan V were a mere shadow of their former strength, fewer than 3,000 battle brothers from a legion that once numbered nearly 89,000. These warriors carried not only physical wounds, but deep psychological scars from witnessing such profound betrayal. As their remaining vessels limped through the warp toward Imperial space, many Salamanders questioned whether their legion could or should continue to exist. Captain Artificers Numian, entrusted with the legion's survival by Vulkan himself, became the de facto leader of the surviving Salamanders. His first priority was consolidating their remaining strength and establishing a secure chain of command. The journey back to Nocturne proved arduous, with traitor forces hunting Loyalist vessels throughout the sector. Several Salamander ships were lost to ambushes or warp anomalies, further reducing their already decimated numbers. When the remnants of the Legion finally reached Nocturne in late 7M31, they found their homeworld largely untouched by the spreading civil war. The planet's isolation and relative strategic insignificance had shielded it from the initial waves of conflict. This provided the Salamanders with a desperately needed sanctuary to regroup and rebuild. The Legion's return to Nocturne was marked by solemn ceremony rather than triumph. Each surviving company presented its badges of battle to the sanctuary cities, while the names of the fallen were inscribed on obsidian tablets in the pantheon of heroes on Prometheus. The Nocturnian people received the returning warriors not with celebration, but with quiet determination, immediately offering their support for the Legion's reconstruction. This reconstruction began with the critical matter of gene seed. The apothecaries who survived Istvan had salvaged what gene seed they could from fallen battle brothers, but these precious genetic materials represented only a fraction of what would be needed to rebuild the Legion. Fortunately, substantial gene seed stocks had been maintained on Prometheus, protected by the chapter's fortress monastery. These reserves, combined with the progenitor glands harvested from veterans too wounded to continue fighting, provided the foundation for the Legion's rebirth. The reformation of the Salamanders coincided with Robout Guilliman's development of the Codex Astartes. As the heresy ground toward its bloody conclusion and the scouring began, the surviving Loyalist legions faced increasing pressure to adopt the organizational principles laid out in Guilliman's tactical treatise. For the Salamanders, severely depleted and lacking their Primarch's guidance, the question of whether to embrace or resist the Codex became a matter of intense debate. The deliberations lasted for months, with the Legion's surviving officers divided between traditionalists who wished to maintain Vulkan's organizational structure and pragmatists who saw merit in Guilliman's approach. Ultimately, a compromise was reached that would become characteristic of the Salamanders' relationship with the Codex Astartes. They would adopt its broad principles while preserving distinctive elements of their cultural identity and tactical doctrine. The most notable deviation from Codex organization came in the Salamanders' company structure. Where the Codex prescribed 10 companies of 100 Marines each, the Salamanders instead organized into 7 companies of approximately 120 battle brothers per company. This structure directly reflected the 7 sanctuary cities of Nocturne, creating a symbolic and practical link between each company and a specific settlement on their homeworld. Each company maintained close ties with its corresponding city, recruiting aspirants and participating in local traditions. The first company, associated with Hesiod, retained the title of Firedrakes and continued to serve as the chapter's veteran company. The subsequent 6 companies each developed distinctive characteristics reflecting the cultures of their associated settlements. The third company, linked to Heliosa, became renowned for its expertise in aerial assault tactics, while the 5th company, connected to Clymene, specialized in siege warfare and defensive operations. This unique organizational structure served several practical purposes beyond its cultural significance. The slightly larger company size provided additional tactical flexibility, allowing for more self-sufficient operations. It also facilitated the Salamanders' emphasis on close mentorship between veterans and newer battle brothers, ensuring the transmission of both combat techniques and cultural values across generations of Astartes. The Salamanders' approach to the Codex extended beyond organizational structure to tactical doctrine. While they adopted many of Guilliman's standardized combat formations and strategic principles, they maintained distinctive elements of Vulkan's combat philosophy. The emphasis on resilience, flamecraft, and close-quarters combat remained central to Salamander's operations. Similarly, their humanitarian focus, prioritizing civilian protection over tactical expediency, continued to distinguish them from more Codex-adherent chapters. This selective implementation of the Codex Astartes established a precedent that would characterize the Salamanders throughout the subsequent millennia. They became known as a chapter that respected the Codex's wisdom without being constrained by its letter, willing to adapt its principles to better serve their unique cultural identity and tactical preferences. As the Salamanders rebuilt their strength, they faced another profound challenge: the absence of their Primarch. Unlike some loyalist legions whose Primarchs remained active during the Scouring, the Salamanders had no direct guidance from Vulkan. His apparent death on Istvan V left a void in the Legion's leadership and spiritual direction that could not easily be filled. This void was partially addressed through the formalization of the Promethean Cult. What had begun under Vulkan as a philosophical approach to warfare evolved into a more structured belief system that preserved his teachings and values. The chaplaincy took a central role in this development, with chaplains serving not only as spiritual leaders, but as living repositories of Vulkan's wisdom. The cult centered around several key tenets: self-reliance through craftsmanship, self-sacrifice in service to humanity, resilience in the face of adversity, and the sacred duty to protect innocent life. These principles were codified in the Tome of Fire, a collection of Vulkan's writings and tactical instructions that became the chapter's most revered text after the Codex Astartes. Central to the Promethean Cult was the belief that Vulkan would eventually return to lead his sons once more. This belief was strengthened by the discovery of the Unbound Flame, a perpetual fire in the depths of Mount Deathfire that Vulkan had allegedly kindled before departing Nocturne. According to chapter tradition, as long as this flame burned, Vulkan lived and would one day return to his legion. This hope gained further substance with the discovery of the first of Vulkan's 9 artifacts. In the decades following the heresy, Forgefather T-Kel, one of the few surviving officers from Vulkan's inner circle, uncovered references to 9 masterwork items that the Primarch had crafted and hidden throughout the galaxy. Each artifact was supposedly imbued with a portion of Vulkan's essence, and together they would mark the path to the Primarch's eventual return. The first artifact, the Spear of Vulkan, was discovered in the ruins of a forge complex on Chorus. This master-crafted weapon, capable of projecting concentrated thermal energy that could pierce even Terminator armor, provided tangible evidence that Vulkan had prepared for a future beyond the heresy. The discovery galvanized the chapter, transforming what had been a spiritual hope into a concrete mission to locate the remaining artifacts and facilitate their Primarch's return. This quest became a defining aspect of Salamander's operations in the post-heresy era. While they fulfilled their duties as defenders of the Imperium, they simultaneously pursued any lead that might reveal the location of another artifact. This dual purpose sometimes placed them at odds with Imperial authorities, who viewed such pursuits as distractions from more pressing strategic concerns. The search for the artifacts was formalized through the creation of the Forgefathers, veteran Salamanders appointed to lead expeditions in search of Vulkan's legacy. Each Forgefather took a vow to locate at least one artifact during his lifetime or die in the attempt. This position became one of the highest honors within the chapter, second only to the chapter master himself. Throughout the turbulent millennia following the heresy, the Salamanders maintained their distinctive approach to warfare and their place within the Imperium. Their relationship with Imperial authorities was generally positive, though occasionally strained by their prioritization of civilian welfare over strategic objectives. Several Lord Commanders of the Imperium noted with frustration the Salamanders' tendency to divert resources to evacuation operations or defensive actions when more aggressive approaches might have achieved military objectives more efficiently. Despite these occasional tensions, the Salamanders' reputation as stalwart defenders of humanity earned them considerable respect throughout the Imperium. Their involvement in a campaign was seen as a guarantee that civilian populations would be protected to the greatest extent possible, even at the cost of Astartes' lives. This reputation made them particularly welcome on frontier worlds and colonies threatened by Xeno's incursions, where Imperial citizens often faced abandonment by other military forces. The Badab War represented a particularly challenging period for the Salamanders. When several chapters in the Maelstrom Zone declared independence from Imperial authority under the leadership of Luft Huron of the Astral Claws, the Salamanders were among the loyalist forces dispatched to suppress the rebellion. This conflict placed them in direct opposition to chapters with whom they had previously fought alongside, including the Mantis Warriors and Executioners. The Salamanders approached this conflict with characteristic restraint, focusing their efforts on minimizing civilian casualties and offering amnesty to Astartes who renounced Huron's cause. This approach drew criticism from more aggressive chapters like the Marines Malevolent, who viewed the Salamanders' restraint as weakness. Nevertheless, the Salamanders' tactics proved effective in securing the surrender of several rebel-held worlds without the devastating civilian casualties that accompanied actions by less discriminating chapters. Throughout their post-heresy history, the Salamanders maintained their distinctive physical characteristics. Their coal-black skin and glowing red eyes, results of their Nocturnian heritage, and the unique interaction between their gene seed and Nocturne's environment made them immediately recognizable among the Adeptus Astartes. These features, combined with their slightly lower numbers compared to Codex-compliant chapters, sometimes led to misunderstandings about their combat effectiveness. Such misconceptions were invariably dispelled on the battlefield. The Salamanders' emphasis on superior wargear and individual skill consistently allowed them to achieve objectives with fewer casualties than statistical models predicted. Their mastery of thermal weaponry made them particularly effective against heavily armored opponents and in Zone Mortalis environments where controlled application of firepower was essential. The chapter's expertise in craftsmanship continued to distinguish their armory from those of other Astartes forces. Nearly every Salamander wore some form of artificer armor, with veterans often sporting completely customized suits incorporating drake scales and other materials unique to Nocturne. Their weapons, particularly flamers and melta-weapons, incorporated modifications that increased both power and reliability beyond standard patterns. These material advantages reflected the Salamanders' continued emphasis on self-reliance. Every battle brother was expected to maintain his own wargear, with most developing considerable skill in metallurgy and engineering. The chapter's tech marines held a position of particular respect, serving not only as technical specialists, but as teachers who preserved and expanded upon traditional Nocturnian crafting techniques. The Salamanders' approach to warfare stands as distinct among the Adeptus Astartes as their obsidian skin and glowing red eyes. While many chapters favor specialized combat doctrines, the White Scars with their lightning assaults, the Imperial Fists with their siegecraft, the Sons of Vulkan have developed a tactical philosophy that mirrors the volcanic world that forged them, methodical, overwhelming, and utterly devastating at close quarters. At the core of Salamander's combat doctrine lies their mastery of thermal weaponry. Flamers, meltaguns, and plasma weapons form the backbone of their armament, with most battle brothers demonstrating remarkable proficiency with these specialized tools of war. The chapter maintains higher concentrations of these weapons than Codex standards suggest, often deploying entire squads equipped with flamers where other chapters might field only a single such specialist. This emphasis extends to their vehicle complement, with land raiders and predators frequently modified to mount additional heavy flamers or multi-meltas. The pyroclasts exemplify this specialization. These elite veterans, serving in a formation unique to the Salamanders, wield advanced thermal weapons, including the dreaded heavy flamers and multi-meltas. Their armor incorporates specialized heat-resistant ceramite layers and additional radiation shielding, allowing them to advance through infernos that would cook even standard Astartes in their armor. In battle, pyroclasts typically deploy in support of tactical squads, using their devastating short-range firepower to flush enemies from entrenched positions or eliminate heavily armored threats. This focus on flame weaponry stems not merely from tactical preference, but from deep cultural symbolism. In Nocturnian culture, fire represents both destruction and renewal. The volcanic eruptions that periodically devastate their settlements also bring forth precious minerals and clear away the old to make way for new growth. Similarly, the Salamanders view their flamecraft as a purifying force, cleansing corruption, while creating opportunity for reconstruction. This perspective stands in stark contrast to the terror tactics employed by traitor legions like the Night Lords, who use similar weapons purely for their psychological impact. The effectiveness of this doctrine becomes most apparent in Zone Mortalis engagements, battles fought in confined spaces like spacecraft interiors, tunnel networks, or dense urban environments. In such settings, the Salamander's thermal weapons can turn narrow corridors into impassable walls of flame, while their melta weapons can breach bulkheads or eliminate armored opponents with singular efficiency. The chapter has developed specialized tactics for such environments, including Drake formations, where Astartes advance in staggered lines, each warrior covering specific fire lanes while protected by his brother's overlapping fields of fire. This specialization in close quarters combat extends beyond weaponry to their general tactical approach. Salamanders rarely employ the rapid strike tactics favored by chapters like the Raven Guard or White Scars, instead preferring methodical advances with overwhelming firepower. Their operations typically begin with concentrated bombardments from thunderfire cannons or whirlwind artillery, followed by heavily armored spearheads that establish beachheads from which the main force can deploy. Once engaged, they advance with deliberate precision, securing territory section by section while establishing fallback positions and supply caches. This methodical approach reflects another distinctive aspect of Salamander's doctrine, their emphasis on strategic resilience over tactical expediency. Where some chapters might accept higher casualties to achieve objectives more quickly, the Salamanders typically employ more conservative tactics that preserve their forces. This philosophy stems partly from necessity. Their slightly lower numbers compared to Codex-compliant chapters makes each battle brother's life particularly valuable, but also from their cultural values, which emphasize the importance of each warrior returning to share his experience and wisdom with future generations. Supporting this combat doctrine is the Salamander's renowned mastery of craftsmanship. Unlike most chapters, where only Techmarines receive extensive training in the maintenance and modification of equipment, every Salamander spends considerable time learning metallurgical and engineering skills. This tradition begins during their neophyte training and continues throughout their service, with Battle Brothers expected to spend their limited free time maintaining and improving their wargear. The practical benefits of this tradition are immediately apparent on the battlefield. Salamander's armor typically incorporates additional layers of ceramite at vulnerable points, custom fitted to each warrior's physique for optimal protection without sacrificing mobility. Their weapons feature hand-crafted components that improve reliability under adverse conditions, particularly important for thermal weapons that operate at extreme temperatures. Even their vehicles receive continuous modifications, with tank crews constantly implementing improvements based on battlefield experience. This craftsmanship reaches its apex in the chapter's Artificer armor. While all Space Marine chapters possess some Artificer armor for their highest-ranking officers, among the Salamanders such master-crafted protection is far more common. Most veterans wear at least partially customized armor, often incorporating materials unique to Nocturne, such as drake scales or heat-resistant alloys forged in the planet's volcanic furnaces. These suits not only provide superior protection, but also serve as expressions of the wearer's personal history and accomplishments, with engravings and embellishments recording significant victories or honoring fallen battle brothers. The emphasis on personal craftsmanship creates a unique relationship between Salamanders and their equipment. Where warriors of other chapters might view their wargear as sacred but ultimately replaceable tools, Salamanders typically develop deep personal connections to weapons and armor they have maintained and modified over decades or centuries of service. This connection often manifests in naming practices, with many Battle Brothers bestowing names upon their primary weapons, particularly those that have served them through multiple campaigns. This cultural emphasis on craftsmanship extends naturally to the chapter's Techmarines, who hold positions of particular respect within the Salamander's hierarchy. Unlike in some chapters, where Techmarines operate somewhat separately from their brothers due to their Mars training, Salamander Techmarines remain fully integrated into the chapter's combat and social structures. They serve not only as technical specialists, but as teachers and preservers of traditional Nocturnian crafting techniques, running forged temples where Battle Brothers can improve their skills under expert guidance. The unique physiological adaptations of the Salamanders provide significant advantages that complement their combat doctrine and craftsmanship traditions. The most obvious of these adaptations is their distinctive appearance, skin as black as coal, and eyes that glow with an internal red luminescence. These traits result from a unique interaction between their gene seed and the radiation-saturated environment of Nocturne, particularly affecting the melanochrome organ that regulates skin pigmentation in Astartes. This extreme melanin production provides substantial protection against radiation and heat, allowing Salamanders to operate in environments that would quickly incapacitate other Astartes. During the Kilimanjaro compliance in the 34th millennium, Salamander's squads advanced through radiation zones, registering over 10,000 rads, without suffering significant degradation in combat effectiveness, while their Iron Hands allies required extensive rad shielding that limited their mobility and tactical options. The ocular adaptation that creates their glowing red eyes similarly provides practical benefits beyond their intimidating appearance. This mutation enhances their vision in low-light conditions, allowing them to operate effectively in the perpetual gloom of Nocturne or similar environments. Some Battle Brothers develop additional visual capabilities, including limited thermal imaging that can detect enemies through thin barriers by their heat signatures, a particularly useful ability when combined with their preference for flame weaponry. Less visible but equally significant is the Salamander's enhanced physical resilience. Their bone structure shows increased density compared to standard Astartes, providing additional protection against impact trauma. Their skin demonstrates remarkable resistance to heat and caustic substances, allowing them to handle materials that would burn even power-armored hands. Some veterans can briefly touch white-hot metal with their bare skin, an ability that proves useful both in their crafting traditions and in certain combat situations. These physiological advantages come with certain limitations. The increased bone density that provides additional durability also adds weight, making salamanders slightly slower on average than warriors of other chapters. Their specialized adaptations to heat and radiation offer less benefit against cold-based weapons or environments, though this vulnerability is generally offset by modifications to their armor when operating in such conditions. The chapter's arsenal includes numerous relics and specialized wargear that reflect both their combat doctrine and their Primarch's legacy. Most significant among these are the 9 artifacts of Vulkan, masterwork items crafted by the Primarch himself and scattered across the galaxy before his disappearance. Each artifact combines practical combat utility with profound symbolic significance, serving as physical connections to their absent Gene Father. The Spear of Vulkan exemplifies these legendary weapons. This master-crafted force weapon combines a power field generator with a built-in heavy flamer, allowing it to both impale armored opponents and engulf them in Promethean fire. The spear's haft contains intricate circuitry that resonates with the wielder's neurological impulses, making it respond almost as an extension of the user's body rather than an external tool. In battle, the weapon leaves contrails of flame as it moves, creating a psychological impact that can break enemy morale before physical contact is even made. Dawnbringer, Vulkan's legendary thunder hammer, represents another class of artifact entirely. This massive weapon, requiring even Astartes' strength to wield effectively, contains impact generators capable of shattering tank armor or collapsing bunker walls with direct hits. The hammer's head incorporates a miniaturized plasma reactor that superheats on impact, allowing it to melt through materials that might resist the kinetic force alone. Chapter records indicate that Vulkan once used Dawnbringer to destroy a traitor Warhound Titan during the Dropsite massacre, striking with such force that the war machine's void shields collapsed and its reactor housing cracked. Beyond these legendary artifacts, the Salamanders maintain an impressive array of chapter-specific equipment. The dragon-scale pattern Terminator armor, worn by the elite fire drakes of the First Company, incorporates actual scales harvested from the great fire lizards of Nocturne. These scales provide additional heat resistance, while their crystalline structure helps disperse energy weapon impacts. The armor's auto senses include enhanced thermal imaging capabilities, allowing fire drakes to track enemies through smoke or solid barriers by their heat signatures. The Infernus pattern Heavy Flamer represents another Salamander innovation. This modified weapon achieves higher combustion temperatures than standard Imperial patterns by incorporating additional compression chambers and specialized fuel mixtures. The resulting flame can melt ceramite armor with sustained exposure and creates a psychological impact that can break enemy morale, particularly among Xenos species with heightened fear responses to fire. During the Gardenal Crusade, a single squad of salamanders equipped with these weapons held a strategic choke point against repeated orc charges, the Greenskins' natural mob courage finally breaking after witnessing dozens of their largest warriors reduced to ash. The Drake's Tooth combat knife serves as both practical tool and cultural identifier. These blades, forged from the actual teeth of Nocturnian drakes, undergo a complex treatment process that hardens the organic material to a diamond-like consistency. The resulting weapon can pierce ceramite joins or even slice through thinner armor plates entirely. Every salamander carries such a knife, and many incorporate the distinctive serrated pattern into their larger weapons as decorative elements or secondary cutting edges. For vehicle support, the salamanders favor heavily armored transports modified for their specific needs. Their rhinos and land raiders typically feature reinforced frontal armor and additional heat shielding, allowing them to advance through areas affected by their own flame weapons without risk of damage. Many incorporate Drake iconography not merely as decoration, but as functional elements, forward ram plates shaped like Drake heads, for instance, that can breach fortifications more effectively than standard patterns. The Salamander's emphasis on flamecraft extends to their orbital assets as well. Their strike cruisers and battle barges often mount additional bombardment cannons specialized for incendiary munitions, capable of igniting vast areas of a planet's surface in controlled patterns that funnel enemy forces into predetermined killing zones. During the Kultur V campaign, Salamanders' vessels created a continent-spanning ring of fire that contained an orc invasion, allowing ground forces to methodically eliminate the trapped greenskins without risk of the infestation spreading. This comprehensive approach to warfare, from personal weapons to orbital fire support, reflects the Salamander's methodical nature. Nothing is left to chance, no advantage neglected, no weakness unaddressed. Their combat doctrine, like their craftsmanship, represents the culmination of millennia of experience, each generation building upon the lessons of their predecessors while maintaining the core principles established by Vulkan himself. The effectiveness of this doctrine has been demonstrated repeatedly throughout Imperial history. During the Tempestus Gulf campaign, a single Salamanders company successfully defended the Hive City Acheron against a Chaos warband 3 times their number, using precisely coordinated flame corridors to channel the enemy into prepared killing zones. On Helatine, Salamanders' forces broke the back of a Tyrannid splinter fleet by targeting synapse creatures with concentrated melt of fire, the precision of their strikes preventing the Xenos from adapting their swarm tactics effectively. Perhaps most impressive was their performance during the Third War for Armageddon, where Salamander's contingent secured and held multiple strategic locations against overwhelming orc forces. At Fire Crag, a reinforced tactical squad held a Promethean refinery against repeated orc assaults for 17 days without relief, using the facility's own fuel lines to create improvised flame traps that incinerated thousands of greenskins. Their defense not only preserved a valuable strategic asset, but prevented an explosion that would have devastated civilian shelters in the surrounding area. Throughout the millennia following the Horus Heresy, the Salamanders have been led by exceptional individuals who embodied Vulkan's ideals of resilience, craftsmanship, and compassion. None has exemplified these virtues more completely than Tushan, the current chapter master, who has guided the Salamanders through some of the most tumultuous events in recent Imperial history. Tushan's rise to leadership followed centuries of distinguished service. Before assuming command of the chapter, he served as captain of the 3rd Company, where he earned renown during the Badab War. His tactical acumen became apparent during the Siege of Sagin, where his forces successfully extracted civilian populations while simultaneously executing precision strikes against secessionist command posts. Tushan personally led an assault on a fortified bunker complex, wielding the ancient relic hammer Spear of Vulkan to breach reinforced doors that had resisted orbital bombardment. Upon his elevation to chapter master in the late 41st millennium, Tushan immediately distinguished himself from many of his counterparts in other chapters. Where some chapter masters become increasingly detached from common citizens, Tushan maintained the Salamander's tradition of direct engagement with the people they protect. During his first decade of leadership, he established additional training facilities on Nocturne that served both Astartes aspirants and planetary defense forces, significantly improving the world's security. Tushan's leadership philosophy emphasizes personal example over distant command. He regularly takes to the battlefield alongside his battle brothers, particularly in situations where civilian populations face imminent threat. During the Volturnus campaign, when Drukhari raiders threatened several Agri settlements, Tushan led a strike force that intercepted the Xenos before they could reach the civilian centers. Survivors reported that the chapter master fought with controlled fury. His master crafted Flamer Vulkan's fury, creating a wall of promethium that trapped the raiders between advancing Salamander squads. The chapter master's most significant test came during the Third War for Armageddon in 998 M41, when Gazkul Thraka's massive orc WAGH descended upon the strategic Hive world. Tushan immediately mobilized the Salamander's full strength. While other chapters deployed limited forces to the conflict, the Salamanders committed 7 full companies, virtually their entire fighting strength, to the defense of Armageddon's civilian population. Tushan established his headquarters in Hive Tempestora, coordinating not only Astartes operations, but also working closely with Imperial Guard and PDF commanders to maximize defensive effectiveness. His strategic priority remained civilian evacuation, with Salamander forces establishing protected corridors through which non-combatants could reach shelter zones. This approach sometimes placed him at odds with other Imperial commanders, particularly those from the Marines Malevolent, who advocated abandoning certain districts to concentrate defenses around strategic assets. The conflict between Tushan and Captain Vinyar of the Marines Malevolent came to a head during the defense of the Hellsreach refugee camps. When Vinyar ordered artillery strikes on Orc forces that had infiltrated areas still containing civilian refugees, Tushan physically intervened, reportedly seizing the Marines' malevolent officer by his gorget and forcing him to witness the human cost of such callous tactics. This confrontation exemplified the Salamanders' unwavering commitment to human life, even when such commitment complicated military operations. Despite these internal conflicts, Tushan's leadership proved decisive in multiple key engagements. At Fire Crag, he personally led a counter-assault against Orc forces that had breached the Promethean refineries, fighting alongside Firedrake's Terminators in room-to-room combat that prevented the Greenskins from detonating the facility. His forces subsequently established a defensive perimeter that protected thousands of civilian workers who had taken shelter in the refinery's reinforced storage chambers. The Armageddon campaign demonstrated Tushan's tactical flexibility as well as his humanitarian focus. When conventional defenses proved insufficient against Orc gargants in the ash wastes, he authorized the deployment of experimental meltamines developed by the chapter's tech marines. These devices, buried along projected enemy advance routes, detonated beneath the massive war machines, liquefying the ground and causing several gargants to sink and topple before they could reach populated areas. While Tushan stands as the Salamander's most visible leader in recent times, the chapter's history includes numerous other heroes whose deeds exemplify their unique approach to warfare and service. Captain Dactyr of the 5th Company earned particular renown during the Jevian planetary rebellion in the 40th millennium. When heretical forces seized control of the planet's atmospheric processors, threatening to poison the air breathable by the general population, Dactyr led a precision strike against the main control facility. Rather than employing the orbital bombardment recommended by Imperial Navy commanders, which would have destroyed the processors and doomed the civilian population, Dactyr's forces infiltrated the facility through maintenance tunnels. His tactical squads systematically cleared each section, while Techmarine Brayarth worked to regain control of the environmental systems. The operation succeeded with minimal damage to the critical infrastructure, saving millions of lives while eliminating the rebel leadership. Chaplain Elysius represents another legendary figure within the chapter. His service spans over 3 centuries, during which he has become the foremost authority on the Promethean Cult and its traditions. Elysius gained particular fame during the search for the Tome of Fire, an ancient text allegedly written by Vulkan himself, containing both spiritual guidance and technical specifications for advanced weaponry. The chaplain led an expedition into the Scorian Caldera, a region of Nocturne rendered nearly uninhabitable even by the planet's harsh standards after a particularly devastating time of trial. Within the caldera, Elysius and his companions discovered a hidden vault sealed with locks that responded only to the unique genetic markers of Vulkan's gene sons. The tome recovered from this vault provided both spiritual renewal for the chapter and practical knowledge that allowed their tech marines to develop several new weapon variants, including the Infernus pattern heavy flamer that has since become standard issue for Salamander Devastator squads. Ancient Gren stands among the chapter's most revered dreadnoughts. Originally serving as a sergeant during the Great Crusade, Gren was critically wounded during the Drop Site Massacre, but managed to protect several wounded battle brothers during the withdrawal. Interred in a Contemptor chassis, he has served the chapter for over 10 millennia, one of the few remaining salamanders with direct memory of Vulkan. His wisdom proves invaluable during chapter councils. While in battle, his ancient frame still delivers devastating firepower. During the Garantine insurgency, Gren held a strategic bridge single-handedly for 6 hours against waves of heretical militia, his assault cannon and close combat claw accounting for hundreds of enemy casualties. The Salamanders' history of heroism extends beyond individual leaders to significant campaigns that have shaped both the chapter and the Imperium. The First War for Armageddon in 444 M41 marked their first major confrontation with the forces of chaos under Angron, the demon Primarch of the World Eaters. The Salamanders deployed 3 full companies to the conflict, focusing their efforts on protecting civilian evacuation routes, while Grey Knight's forces engaged the demon Primarch directly. Captain Uriel Korsh of the Second Company led a particularly crucial action during this campaign. When World Eater's berserkers breached Hive Acheron's outer defenses, threatening thousands of civilians awaiting evacuation, Korsh's forces established a defensive line in the main processional way. His Sternguard veterans, armed with master-crafted Kombai Meltas, created killing zones at key intersections, their disciplined fire cutting down the frenzied Chaos Space Marines before they could reach the civilian shelters. Though Korsh himself fell in the final hours of the battle, his sacrifice allowed the evacuation vessels to depart safely. The Second War for Armageddon 8 decades later saw the Salamanders return to the embattled Hive world, this time facing Gazkul Thraka's first major WAGH. While the Blood Angels and Ultramarines engaged in more mobile warfare across the planet's surface, the Salamanders concentrated on urban defense, particularly in Hive and Furnace, where millions of civilians remained trapped by advancing Orc forces. Vulkan Heastan, then serving as captain of the Fourth Company before his later appointment as Forgefather, distinguished himself during the defense of Infernus's main generatorium complex. When Orc commandos infiltrated the facility and planted demolition charges, Heastan led a 5-man Terminator squad in a teleport assault directly into the complex's reactor chamber. Fighting in conditions so radioactive they would have killed unaugmented humans in seconds, the Salamanders eliminated the Orc saboteurs and disarmed the explosives with moments to spare. Had the generatorium been destroyed, power would have been lost to life support systems, sustaining nearly 3 million civilians in the Hive's lower levels. The Badab War represented a different sort of challenge for the Salamanders. This conflict pitted them against fellow Astartes, who had rebelled against imperial authority under the leadership of Luft Huron of the Astral Claws. The Salamanders contributed forces to the loyalist effort, though they approached the conflict with characteristic restraint, always seeking to minimize casualties among both civilians and potentially redeemable Astartes on the opposing side. Captain Tushan, not yet elevated to chapter master, commanded the Salamanders' contingent during the latter stages of this conflict. His forces specialized in securing populated areas with minimal collateral damage, allowing more aggressive chapters like the Minotaurs to engage the rebel Astartes directly. This approach earned criticism from some Imperial commanders who viewed it as overly cautious, but post-conflict analysis confirmed that areas secured by Salamanders' forces suffered significantly lower civilian casualties and infrastructure damage than comparable zones taken by other chapters. Perhaps most significant was Tushan's role in offering honorable terms to Astartes from chapters like the Executioners and Mantis Warriors, who had sided with the secessionists more from misplaced honor than genuine rebellion. His willingness to acknowledge the complex loyalties involved rather than viewing the conflict in absolute terms helped facilitate the eventual surrender of these forces, preventing further unnecessary bloodshed between battle brothers. The Salamanders' relationship with other imperial organizations reflects their unique approach to warfare and governance. Their connections with the Adeptus Mechanicus have historically been strong but complex. While they share the Mechanicus' reverence for technology and craftsmanship, the Salamanders reject the more dogmatic aspects of Martian doctrine. Where tech priests often treat technology as quasi-religious artifacts to be venerated rather than understood, Salamander tech marines emphasize practical knowledge and innovation within established parameters. This philosophical difference has occasionally created tension, particularly regarding modifications to standard equipment patterns. Salamander tech marines routinely modify flame weapons and melta technology beyond Mechanicus-approved specifications, enhancing performance based on battlefield experience rather than adhering strictly to ancient templates. During the Griffon IV campaign, Magos Dominus Silax formally protested the Salamander's field modifications to Predator tanks, claiming such alterations violated the sanctity of the machine spirits. Chapter Master Tushen diplomatically resolved the dispute by demonstrating that the modifications actually reduced mechanical failures by 37%, appealing to the Mechanicus's own value of efficiency. Despite these occasional disagreements, the Salamanders maintain productive relationships with several Forge worlds, particularly Nocturne's neighboring Forge world of Mezoa. This relationship proved especially valuable following the formation of the Great Rift, when supply lines across the Imperium became unreliable. Mezoa's production facilities provided the Salamanders with crucial replacement parts and ammunition when standard requisition channels failed, allowing the chapter to maintain operational readiness during this tumultuous period. The Salamander's relationship with the Imperial Guard stands as one of the most positive among Astartes chapters. Where some Space Marines view mortal soldiers with barely concealed contempt, or, at best, professional detachment, the Salamanders actively collaborate with Guard units, providing training, tactical advice, and morale-boosting presence. During joint operations, Salamander commanders typically integrate Guard assets into their strategic planning rather than treating them as mere auxiliary forces, recognizing the value of combined arms approaches. This collaborative approach was exemplified during the Lycanthos Drift campaign, where Captain Adrax Agatone of the 3rd Company worked closely with the 122nd Cadian Regiment to repel a Genestealer cult uprising. Rather than operating independently, Agatone attached Salamander squads to Guard companies, providing both combat support and on-the-ground leadership. This integration allowed the Imperial forces to respond more effectively to the cult's asymmetric tactics, with Guard numbers complementing Astartes' quality in a synergistic deployment that minimized casualties on both sides. The formation of the Great Rift in 999 M41 and the subsequent Indomitus Crusade brought unprecedented challenges and changes to the Salamanders chapter. When the galaxy was split in two by this immense warp storm, Nocturne found itself on the southern side of the divide, in the region designated Imperium Nihilus. Communication with Imperial authorities on the other side of the rift became sporadic at best, forcing the Salamanders to operate with greater autonomy than ever before. Chapter Master Tushen responded to this crisis by dispersing his forces strategically throughout accessible sectors, prioritizing the defense of populated worlds threatened by the sudden upsurge in warp activity. The 2nd and 3rd Companies established a presence in the Donnar sector, shoring up planetary defenses against increasing chaos raids, while the 4th Company undertook a series of strike missions against Drukhari pirates taking advantage of the confusion to increase their slave-taking operations. The arrival of Robout Guilliman's Indomitus Crusade brought both reinforcement and adaptation. The introduction of Primaris Marines to the Salamanders ranks initially created tension within the chapter. These new warriors, with their enhanced capabilities and modified gene seed, lacked the cultural connection to Nocturne that defined traditional Salamanders. More significantly, they did not initially develop the characteristic coal-black skin and glowing red eyes that had become synonymous with Vulkan's sons. Tushen approached this integration challenge with characteristic wisdom. Rather than segregating the Primaris Marines into separate companies as some chapters did, he distributed them among existing formations, pairing each Primaris warrior with a veteran battle brother who would serve as both combat partner and cultural mentor. He established a formal pilgrimage program requiring all Primaris Salamanders to spend at least 1 year on Nocturne, living among the population and learning their traditions firsthand. This integration process proved remarkably successful. By the 2nd generation of Primaris recruitment, those created from Nocturne's native population rather than the initial Martian-produced warriors, the physiological differences began to diminish. These new Primaris Marines developed the characteristic obsidian skin and glowing eyes, though often to a lesser degree than their firstborn brothers. More importantly, they embraced the chapter's cultural values and combat doctrines, becoming true salamanders in spirit as well as gene seed. The introduction of Primaris equipment and units allowed the salamanders to evolve their tactical approaches while maintaining their core doctrines. Aggressor squads, with their focus on overwhelming short-range firepower, integrated seamlessly into existing salamander strategies. The Flamestorm gauntlets wielded by these warriors proved particularly effective in urban pacification operations, allowing for precise application of thermal weaponry that minimized collateral damage while maximizing combat effectiveness. Eradicator squads similarly complemented traditional salamander strengths, their Melta rifles providing enhanced anti-armor capabilities that aligned perfectly with the chapter's expertise in thermal weaponry. During the Lithosian campaign against Death Guard forces, Eradicator teams proved devastatingly effective against Plague Marine concentrations, their coordinated volleys penetrating even warp-corrupted Terminator plate. As the era Indomitus progresses, the Salamanders continue to exemplify the finest traditions of the Adeptus Astartes while adapting to unprecedented challenges. Their unwavering commitment to humanity's protection, their mastery of craft and flame, and their resilience in the face of adversity make them truly worthy sons of Vulkan. Though their Primarch remains absent in body, his spirit lives on in every green-armored warrior who stands between innocent lives and the darkness that threatens to consume the Imperium. In this darkest age, when the Imperium stands divided and beset on all sides, the Salamanders remain a beacon of hope, not merely for their martial prowess, but for their reminder that even transhuman warriors can retain their humanity. As long as the Promethean flame burns in their hearts, the Sons of Vulkan will continue to forge a path through adversity, protecting the Emperor's realm not simply out of duty, but out of genuine compassion for those they were created to defend.